Because Moses has seen the God who lives. Moses has seen him who is invisible, and he can persevere and operate in all these exchanges with Pharaoh and beyond without fear.
Welcome to the PAX Christian Church podcast. We are so glad you've joined us today, and we pray that this message speaks to you and encourages you and challenges you to live for Jesus with everything that you have. Stick around after the message. We'd love to find out how we can connect with you and be praying for you. Here's this week's message from our Sunday gathering.
Hey everybody, long time no see. It's good to see you. Trusting in God, not worshiping idols, not giving our lives over to other things. I don't know about you, but as much as I've been following Jesus for quite a while now, I still find it difficult at times. Yeah, I still find it awkward at times, and it's funny where it crops, where it crops up, where it comes out of us. That that there would be some fear, some concern, some even allegiance in some way to something else. It's when we operate in fear, when we live in a way that is influenced by something other than God, something that would take us in some direction other than where God would lead us. There's something else in there, whether it's ourselves or some value that we hold to from our society or some other human that we want to impress or some status or something, but there's something that ends up idolatrously, I think that's the word. That seems like the right amount of endings to that, the right conjugation. But there's something about the idolatry, there's idolatry in that, in choosing to elevate something else's opinion or influence or desire or goal or guide for us above and beyond God's. And when we set something else in that place, that's idolatry. And it doesn't often, in America at least, it doesn't usually look like it did in, the Old Testament where, Gideon gets called and the first thing he does, he's like, all right, well, I'm going to go tear down the, Asherah poles and the Baal, things. And I'm going to go set fire to the wooden idols where people have, corrupted our faith as a nation. Like that's usually not what people are doing. They're not going around and performing weird rituals publicly around some giant statue. But at the same time, I think you could make a case for American idolatry, that we idolize our political perspective and our nation's allegiance above our allegiance to the kingdom of heaven and our service to the King of heaven. There's status and money and wealth. There's trying to impress somebody from when we're young or not so young and single, and trying to impress that other person who might become a significant other. We can be really influenced by that, and even in marriage, wanting to be wanting to keep that person happy or to try and manage that somehow by putting everything into I'm going to base everything on what they're going to be okay with. And there's an aspect of that needs to happen. You do need to sacrifice and be engaged in and sharing life with somebody else, with your spouse if you're married, but that can't come at the expense of following God. That doesn't get to become the priority. And unfortunately for us, being fallen humans, we tend to do our best when pressed the hardest. And so some have said, maybe the best thing for American Christianity would be for America to fall and or persecute the church. They look around at other places and go, when the church is really pressed and crushed, turns out the faith really explodes. But I think part of what happens there too is those who are kind of just sort of into it and it doesn't really interfere with football, so I could show up today because I don't care about who's playing the morning game. My team plays this afternoon. Look, I know the preseason just started, so get that right. Just get the NFL Plus package and stream it later, okay? You'll be fine. There's something about the testing of faith that comes when it's really hard put to it. And over the past, probably decade, I've encountered more and more foreign missionaries, whether from here serving overseas or people from other countries who have looked kind of pitying upon America and gone, man, it's so sad that you guys have such freedom, because it just bred such horrible apathy. And it has become an idol of like comfort that I don't want to put any effort into following Jesus. And reading Moses' account here again as we continue in Hebrews 11, and we start off in verse 27. And so if you want to join me there, if you have a Bible, we can open to Hebrews 11, and then we'll be jumping back into Exodus. If you have the Bible app, we have the notes there, and you can join us on there. But looking through the story of Moses over and over, it's just like, man, like would I have the strength to get the bravery, the courage to go and stand before Pharaoh the way he does? And you see this turnaround in his life, because we looked at it, Mandy looked at it last week and talked about how Moses, he's lived with, he's born into slavery. In the Hebrew people are oppressed and enslaved by Egypt. He's born into that at a time when Pharaoh has issued a decree that all the boys are to be thrown into the river. And so his parents eventually do that, but they put him in a basket and protect him and put him in the river, and he's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. And so he's raised as the grandson of the king of Egypt. He's raised in the royal household as part of the royal family, but he still keeps looking and identifying with his people as he goes, and he sees an Egyptian slave master beating and abusing one of his own people. He goes and interferes and ends up actually killing the guy and trying to bury him in the sand, and he's found out. And when he's found out, he's afraid because everyone's going to know. And then Pharaoh does find out and tries to kill him, and so Moses leaves, and he takes off for 40 years. He's 40 years old when he leaves Egypt. And now we're going to catch up in a minute here to where he's 80 now. He's been in the wilderness for 40 years, serving his father-in-law and just being gone from all of this. He left in fear. But now we're going to read about a different time as he prepares to leave Egypt once he comes back. And there's no fear this time. It's different. Hebrews 11:27 says this: by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. And so I want to jump back and look at what changed in him, because he for sure fled in fear when he leaves Egypt the first time. It's not talking about when he ran away because he killed a guy and then everybody knows and he's going to be killed and prosecuted for that. But if we turn to Exodus 3, we get to see what's different in Moses, what changed, why things now look different, and why there's no longer fear. He's no longer a slave to fear. Yeah, that song choice was intentional. Yes, that wasn't just a coincidence. I mean, the Holy Spirit definitely led that to be in the set, but that was not just like, what? This morning, just now, like I knew. Okay. Exodus 3, starting in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. So he's escaped and fled, and he's out away from Egypt, and this is now 40 years into him being gone from Egypt. He's an 80-year-old shepherd out in the wilderness. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. This is this crazy encounter with God where he gets to see the angel of the Lord. And we've talked about before when we were looking at Abraham that some of the characteristics of the angel of the Lord that a lot of scholars, not all, but just to throw it out there, that if God really is the invisible God and the Father has never appeared, even in the New Testament, it says nobody has seen him, but Jesus is the one appearance of the Father, well then expressions like this are either something that like doesn't qualify because it's just the angel of the Lord, but it's still God. It's not just some angel. And so this is somehow a form of God, the Holy Spirit, or Jesus, the Son. Somehow God is showing up in this bush. And showing up in an incredible way on this place called Horeb, which the exact location and understanding of the names of these things, like things like that change over time anyway. I mean, we can look back just a couple hundred years in our country and know like, well, this place is called this, but it used to be this and that. And so the names shift a little bit, but Mount Horeb, this particular spot on the mountain, is also known as Sinai. And sometimes Horeb refers to the whole range or just that peak. Sometimes Sinai refers to the whole range or just that peak. But if that name triggers anything for you, Mount Sinai is where Moses goes and receives the Ten Commandments. It's also Mount Horeb is where he strikes the rock and gets the water out. God keeps bringing them back to this place, this holy place where he meets with Moses right here. So Moses sees this strange sight where there's fire within a bush, and yet it's not being consumed. But there is some sort of fire there. It's not ruining the bush. It's not burning it up. It's not using it as fuel. But there's still something, I mean, it's emitting light and energy. Like you can tell that there's something big going on. He said, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, oh yeah, that got out of order. Okay, sorry. I was looking at my notes on the app there, and they're not in the right order. So, sorry. We'll come back to Hebrews 11 in a second. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Yeah, here I am." Sorry, one second. Are you guys hearing the ringing there? Because I'm hearing it, and it's like talking into a phone that's echoing. Is there any way we could just dial it back just a hair in the house? I'm sorry. I can't stop hearing myself repeat things at my ear. Thank you. So Moses said, "Here I am." And God says, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you were standing is holy ground." And then he goes on to explain who he is. But the place where you're standing is holy ground. This is not like normal fire where, like, if you were to approach the sun, like, I saw something the other day, just one of those weird internet conspiracies where they're just, I swear, just making up things or on drugs or something. But I mean, just like stuff that doesn't even make sense if you like ever paid attention in science class, even up to like 5th grade. But they were saying like, well, how come we don't go like check out the sun and like send a car over there and drive around on it? Like, physics, I don't know, but like you can't even get close to it. Like you can't actually get to the surface of the sun, partially because it's a flaming ball of gas, and partially because it would destroy you before, like anything we have here would melt down and burst into flames or explode before it even actually reached the sun. Now, the sun is unapproachable, and so is the entire area around it. The energy, the holiness is actually an appropriate word for that because it means other and unique and different and separate in a way that is just completely isolates it in a way from other things. Anything that's not designed to withstand that kind of heat cannot approach the sun. In the same way, except without the whole like fire part. I mean, it looks like fire, but it's not ruining this bush. As Moses approaches, God goes, "Take your shoes off." And that's kind of a weird thing, but I mean, there's this element of, I need you not to be walking in here, into this proximity, with all the stuff of the world on your feet. You can't just bring all of the chaos and brokenness of this world and humanity right into my presence. Not because God feels like he's going to be tainted. He's not sitting there wearing like a pretty white robe going like, "Oh my gosh, don't get it on me." That's not it. And having been in youth ministry for a long time, a lot of the analogies that are told about God's holiness tend to present it kind of like that. Like God can't allow any of that stuff in because he doesn't like it and it's icky. No, it's that if Moses steps in unholy into the holy presence of God, this sacred space where God is manifesting his presence and occupying, it will destroy him. It'll be like he stepped too close to the sun. It would ruin him. The holy glory of God is beyond compare, beyond comprehension. He is holy and other and beyond us. And in his perfection, you draw too near to that, and it's going to destroy anything that's corrupted, destroy anything that's unworthy of being in his presence. And so he tells Moses to remove the method of going about on this earth and come to him a little more purely the way he was designed, as barefoot. By this act, he's able to get closer to God. And as he's standing there, God continues. He says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. See, now he's afraid, but his fear is shifting. He's beginning to fear the one who could destroy him with his holy goodness just by the contrast of his unrighteousness and unworthiness standing in that presence. He's now terrified. I don't deserve to be here. And this is a little scary, a lot scary. But the Lord continues. Oh, here's where I wanted to put that. Yeah, there. Notes being out of order throws me. This is the encounter. Why Hebrews 11:27 says, he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. As he encounters God in this moment, this is going to change everything. Standing in this holy place, encountering the holy, one, true, and living God, and then walking through all that he's about to do as he steps into Egypt. He's still scared. He's still unsure. He's still not confident in what's going to happen. But you watch as we go through, and God changes Moses, not for his own sake, but he gets him to the point where, in faith, at the end of the plagues that occur, he's able to leave Egypt confident in who God is and more or less unconcerned with who Pharaoh is. So God continues. He says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. He says, I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. There's a lot of ites. And I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. And I don't know why they're not called the Egyptites, but it's fine. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. God is repeating the same promises that he's given to Abraham previously and to Isaac and Jacob. God has been saying the same thing over and over and over. I'm going to give you this land, the land of Canaan. I'm going to bring you to this place, a land of milk and honey. And it's this promised land that God has offered to his people. And it's this great and glorious fertile ground where they can, it's carries some imagery saying, like, I'm bringing you back to a place where we can start building you back into a people that is worthy of my presence, that is worthy. Ultimately, the goal is to restore us to the Garden of Eden, to restore us to that place where God walks with his people daily and where we meet face to face and where sin and corruption does not separate us from him. And so he's moving them toward that, giving them a taste in this world of what is to come for eternity. And he's reiterating the same promises, going, I'm not just like, what was your dad's name? Yeah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Like, that's me. He's going, I'm the same God who promised this, and let me promise it to you now. Let me tell you the same thing I've told him. And he's going to be like, wow, we've been passing that on. Like, I do know. Okay, I know who you are. I recognize this. But apparently they've also kind of fallen away from this. And so as he says, go, I'm going to send you to take my people out of Egypt, Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. I'm going to go. I'm coming with you. Don't worry about him. When was the last time you went to hang out with Pharaoh and he was standing in a bush that was burning that didn't consume the bush? And you had to take off your shoes so your feet didn't explode off your body. God said, this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Here's the thing that's going to happen. Not only am I going to bring them out, but you're going to come right back here and you're going to worship me right here. You're going to celebrate that I have delivered you from Egypt. Moses said to God, well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what's his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. That is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This is where we get God's name. It's written in the Hebrew scriptures multiple times before, but this is where we kind of get the context of it, and honestly, how we kind of learn to spell it. Because the Hebrew people considered, and for eons, for centuries, rabbis and scribes considered the name of God too precious, and given that one of the commandments, the 10 Commandments, says, do not take his name in vain, there's too much at stake to just go around throwing out the name of God like it don't matter. I don't think that was his intent. He literally gives his name so it can be claimed, so it can be described who he is, so that people can know him above some other random god. No, I'm not talking about Molech. I'm not talking about Baal. I'm not talking about Asherah. I'm not talking about Astarte or any other foolish false god or any demons or angels or powerful kings or anybody else. I am Yahweh, the creator God, the one God. I am who I am. He says I am 3 times. Each of those is that name, Yahweh. The way it's conjugated, it's kind of in this weird tense that's not used for things. It's almost improper grammar. It's kind of like in Genesis 1 when God says, let us make mankind in our image. The one God says, let us. And it's kind of, it has these little British Queen vibes of let us, let us make mankind in our image. And, it's like the royal we, except God is 3 in 1. He literally is that pluralistic singular being, the triune God. In this moment, there's a little bit of that. He says, I am 3 times. There's just a hint of the Trinity in that. But even more, the way it's tensed and the way it's laid out, the rabbinical understanding for centuries before Jesus showed up and even continuing on is that right here, God is claiming to be, I am he who was, I am he who is, and I am he who always will be. I am the God who is eternally existent and present. The God who was and who is to come. The God who was and who is and always will be. There's no beginning and no end to our God. There's a beginning and end to creation. There's a beginning and end to us. There is no beginning and end to God. He is this one unique God. And so now, armed with a name, armed with this description, and armed with this claim what's your name? Existing. What? What kind of name is that? I exist. That's my name. I have always existed. I exist now. I will exist. You won't exist. I'll exist. I still exist. That's such a big claim of something that only God could really be claiming. And so armed with this, God continues to wrestle with Moses a little bit because people are stubborn. But God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. This is the name that we are to know God by. And so there's a bit of debate back and forth. Moses is like, well, I stutter. I don't really want to go and, talk. And he doesn't want to go and speak. And God's like, I got you. I'll send your brother with you. He's fine. Like, I don't. But I haven't even seen him in like 40 years. I don't know if he's going to know me. And, I don't know about this. But what am I going to do when I get there? And God's like, okay, look, throw your staff down. And he's like, okay. He throws his staff down, and it turns into a big snake. Freaks him out. He goes, now pick it up. Like, He picks it up. And he gets the snake off the ground. It turns back into a staff. He goes, do that. They'll freak out. Then they'll know I'm with you, because you couldn't do that when you left. Now you come back, you got like staff snake powers. And he's like, I don't know. And he's like, all right, fine. Put your hand in your cloak. Okay. Pull it back out. Leprosy. Put it back. Healed. I have absolute control over what things exist, how they are, whether or not they're sick or good. I am the creator. I can create and uncreate whatever I want, whenever I want. I will go with you. Go do this. Finally, Moses is convinced, and they go. He hooks up with his brother Aaron. They connect, and they go and stand before Pharaoh. We're going to jump ahead to Exodus 5. And we're going to take a deep look at one plague and then kind of an overview of the rest and bring it back home. But so don't freak out and be like, the plagues go for like 5 more chapters. Are you kidding me? Yeah, don't worry. Okay, Exodus 5. We're just going to look at a few verses here at the beginning of this. Starting in verse 1. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. We need to go and worship. This is the request. It didn't even say like, let us go and then never come back. That's not actually what he said. That's what's going to happen. But everybody already knows. And God has already said, don't worry, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart and he's not going to let you go. But watch what I do then. And so he already predicts what's going to happen. He does not make Pharaoh, and this is an important thing, and we'll get to it here in a second too, but since I brought it up just now, I might as well say it now. One of those like people who've never read the Bible but want to attack it, things that people say against Scripture is God is a monster. Look what he does to Pharaoh, and then he brags on it, but he's the one who made Pharaoh's heart hard. Incorrect. That's not what happens. There are several times where it does say, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart to make sure that he didn't relent on this. But Pharaoh had already made that choice. Pharaoh started it. Actually, his family started it generations ago. They have already chosen not only to reject God, and you'll see that here in a second, not only did they reject God outright, but they oppress God's people. They refuse very reasonable requests for some permittance of worship and doing that. And the way he's rejecting and treating God's people, remember, at the beginning of Exodus, it starts with, hey, you know what? There's a lot of them. Why don't we spend like a generation chucking their babies into a river so they can be eaten by crocodiles? These are not good people. He's not a nice guy who's like, oh man, he was such a good dude. Why you got to treat him like that? Like, that's not it. He doesn't have like the really, like heartfelt villain story where you're like, I relate to this guy. No. You can do that with Thanos if you want to watch Endgame, but that doesn't work for Pharaoh. Thanos is crazy too, but he had a little more purpose in his genocide. But again, genocide, like, sorry, all bets are off. Like, no. So Moses and Aaron, they go to Pharaoh and say, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I don't know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go. Who's that? I never heard that name. What God sent you? The one who always exists. Yeah, I don't know that guy. I don't care. But listen to the way he's talking about it. He's not going like, wow, I should go ask my God and my priest what they think of that God and if they're aware of this God. Like, hey, did you guys know about this God? He's saying, I don't know him. We're not friends. We don't hang out at the God lunches. Pharaoh claims to be a God. This is so much more than even just he's a nasty ruler. He is a false, all-powerful God. The king of not just the people of Egypt, but claiming to be created by or the embodiment of the king of the gods of Egypt as well. According to Pharaoh, he, there with his like fancy cobra hat, he looks like the Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe. And, he's got that, and he's looking all angry and snake-like. He's trying to be the king of the gods of Egypt. And that's who he's claiming to be. And he's talking about God as if they brought up another king. I don't know that king. I've never even heard of that nation. Get out of here. My nation doesn't have to acknowledge your nation. But then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness and offer sacrifices to our God, or he may strike us with plagues or the sword. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to work. You're just lazy. The Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making the bricks. Let them go gather their own straw. I'm not even going to give you this stuff anymore. You go do it yourself. And the quota's increased. So work harder and make more, or else I'll beat you all to death. But we're getting to where Moses is no longer afraid of Pharaoh. Before, he killed one Egyptian, and when he heard Pharaoh found out, he fled, and he didn't come back for 40 years. Now he's standing right in front of this guy who is probably, since he was raised the son of Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh's grandfather, or grandson, that Pharaoh died. Now the next Pharaoh should be his adopted uncle. And so he's looking up to Unc, and just going, let my people go. This isn't going to go well for you. Because Moses has seen the God who lives. Moses has seen him who is invisible, and he can persevere and operate in all these exchanges with Pharaoh and beyond without fear. Because Pharaoh can't hold a candle to the God that he met standing in a burning bush. Pharaoh can't. Pharaoh, in all the time growing up in that household, Pharaoh's not walking around like, hey, you want to hold my staff? Ha, it's a snake. That wasn't happening. So we fast forward to Exodus 7. There's some more promises of deliverance and some more kind of back and forth about how this is going to work. And Moses, again, kind of gives one more I'm not really a great spokesperson for all this. And God goes, okay, fine, look, your brother's going to speak. He will do fine. Have him do all the things. You tell him what I tell you, and he will say all the things. Okay. So now they're going to go. So the Lord, in 7, verse 8, Exodus 7, verse 8, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Oh, I remember this. Yeah, okay. I brought the snake staff. Okay, cool. We'll throw the snake staff down. And Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. And Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. And Pharaoh then summoned his magicians, wise men, and sorcerers. And the Egyptian magicians, that's hard to say. That's my new one I usually have the kids say toy boat or unique New York. Now I would say Egyptian magician. Okay. Just because it's hard. Also, when the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. So there's some demonic magic happening here, and they're able to conjure up some snakes from sticks somehow too. But Aaron's staff swallows up their staffs. They make little cobras. He's got a big cobra. That cobra goes around, eats up all their cobras, comes back, turns back into a staff. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. God said, don't worry, his heart's going to be hard. He's not going to give in to any of this stuff. It's just, I'm going to keep doing these things, and he's going to be like, oh. And so he never lets it happen. Just as the Lord had said. I want to cover just a couple of the highlights of what we're going to read, and we're going to go through the first plague just to kind of get a picture of it. But the highlights of what some of the themes and things running through, I would encourage you to take the time and start in Exodus 3 this week and just read through to like Exodus 10. It sounds like a lot. It's not that much. It'll probably take you 20 minutes if you just sit down and do it. It's not a lot, but just to take the time and go through. And I started charting some of this out, and there's a good podcast that I was listening to on it that I can get you guys the link to and everything. But some of the things that happen here, this is a battle between the true God and a false God, claiming to be the powerful God. This is the God of creation, the true God who actually made everything, taking a people who has rejected him and set themselves up and claiming to be creator, claiming to be all-powerful. God is going to, every plague ends up being kind of an act of decreation. He's undoing things from Genesis 1, from the days of creation. He's twisting and undoing them as punishments on these people who claim to be the creators. You claim to be the creator, God? Great. You stop this from happening. But what has to happen every time? Moses, come back. Go tell your God not to do this anymore. When should I have him do it? Just so you know, like they didn't just happen to pack up and leave. When's the exact time you want this to happen? Like stuff like that keeps happening. But there's a pattern to all of these things where Moses goes, as Pharaoh is going down and surveying the river Nile is the life-giving thing of water in Egypt, desert place. Water's important. The river is this big source of life and power. It represents the power and might of Egypt and all their shipping lanes and all of that stuff, right? It's this enormous thing right here. And as Pharaoh goes down to the water, 3 of the times Moses comes down and confronts him right there and gets in his face right as he's trying to stand there, and he confronts him and engages him with these plagues. Other times, and that's out of the first 9 plagues, 1, 4, and 7, the first of each kind of set of 3, he does that. The next ones, he just shows up at Pharaoh's place, and he just walks right in. He's like, hey, by the way, I got a new one for you. Ready for this one? This is going to be great. I got frogs. You want frogs? I got frogs. And then he comes back another time. He's like, hey, so all your livestock are going to die, every single one of them, but not ours. Israel's not going to be touched by that. So, good luck with that. And then the last one, locusts. You guys get locusts. We don't get locusts. You get locusts. You're welcome. And then the third, the sixth, and the 9th one are all things that God, just seeing Pharaoh's reaction, he doesn't even really wait for a response. He just has them enact another one. And so there's some patterns there. There's some issues of, like I said, de-creation. There's some things of even putting back on Pharaoh what he has claimed. Remember how this all started? Pharaoh started throwing Hebrew babies in the river. Throw all the male children in the river. So Moses keeps going down to the river and challenging him. The first thing they do is ruin the river with blood. But it ruins all the water in the land. They can't get any until they dig new wells next to the river and get a different water source. But even stuff in stone cisterns and things, they open it. This is not a natural occurrence. This is not like the red algae where you see like in China or somewhere where they had like the big river that's all red because it's got a particular kind of plankton or algae or something in it. Like, that's not what this is. This is literal blood. It ruined it. Everything died. Everything got sick. They opened up previously clean vats of water and open those, and it's blood now. It's a bucket of blood instead of drinking water. It's disgusting. It smells horrible. It kills everything in the river. It's the blood of the firstborn children of Israel crying out and God doing something about it and showing Pharaoh what he's done. He starts with that. 7 times throughout this, which don't get weird about numbers. But in general, if you see something 7 times or referenced 7 times, it's pointing towards completeness and God's whole and perfect provision for something. 7 times God says, you will know I am Yahweh. I'll do this, and then you will know that I am Yahweh. Not to mention, there's a lot of similarity between, you've seen the Egyptian gods when they have like it's like a human with like a dog head or whatever. A bunch of them look like the things that come out. There's a frog one. Imagine having a frog god. And this foreign god sends this dude to show up, and he's like, plague of frogs. And your magicians are able to make more frogs, but they can't make any of the frogs go away. And so millions of frogs just die and rot in your house and in everyone else's house. And you can't do anything about it until you get Moses to ask the one true God to remove them. And then they go away. But let's quickly look at the some of this for the plague of blood. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out into the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. And then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now, you have not listened. So this is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord, that I am Yahweh. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. Not made like blood, not turned to the color of blood. It will literally be transformed into blood. Just like how Jesus changed water into wine, but that was the beginning of a new creation. Rather than judgment. The water will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. This is not the encounter of a man who's afraid of Pharaoh. Moses walks right up to him, gets in his face, and goes, watch this. I'm going to ruin Egypt. Because you would not serve the God. You would not even consider turning to the God who created you, who made this place, who gifted you with these blessings, who gave you the opportunity to do this. Moses perseveres through these things, through all these threats, through all of this danger, through all of this insane. Like, can you imagine walking up to the most powerful king, and somebody who's kind of a murderous lunatic? Like, this is like walking up to Putin and being like, hey, I'm going to destroy all the water right in your face. You ready? Watch this. Like, you'd be nuked. Like, you'd drop a nuclear bomb on your face right there. Moses and Aaron just don't even, they're like, no, we've seen the God who is invisible. Like, what do you got? You got nothing. Every time we bring it, you can't bring anything back to it. The Egyptian magicians were able to do the same thing by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron. So the Egyptian magicians are like, presto changeo, I made water into blood. And that's all they did. They were able to duplicate the thing that Pharaoh did, that God does to the water. And so Pharaoh's like, yeah, good enough for me. Forget you guys. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace and did not even take this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. And so it keeps continuing on. They go through each of these things, and sometimes the magicians are able to bring up a little bit of the same kind of thing, but they can't get rid of any of them. They can duplicate it. He's like, gnats out of the dust. Gnats come up out of the dust. These death-biting flies come up out of the dust and just plague everything, fill everything, and they're in your eyes and everything. Anybody ever else? I run into those stupid clouds of those little no-see-ums all the time. Can you imagine the entire air being full of those things everywhere you go? Oh my gosh, I'd jump in a river, even if it was full of blood. That sounds like just the absolute word. Like, I read that and I can feel one getting in my eye, and having to do that this for the next 4 hours, trying to get all 30 of its legs out of there or whatever. I don't know what happens, but it seems like it just now my eye is ruined. I need a new one. This doesn't work anymore. All the way through. And Moses, standing in front of an increasingly irate and furious Pharaoh, not only does he keep pushing, he keeps asking for more. He's like, we need to go. Pharaoh's like, okay, you guys can go. He's like, nope, everybody. No. Then the next time, we need to go. Okay, all the men can go, but nobody else. No. Okay, fine. And Pharaoh gets upset. And he changes his mind anyway. And it keeps escalating. But the whole time Moses is doing this, and this eventually leads to their exit. And we're going to get into that more next week. We're going to talk about the Passover and the final plague and what happens there. But I want to take us through Colossians 1 as we prepare our hearts for communion, as we bring this back together, because you and I probably aren't going to stand before a foreign king of Egypt and bring a staff that turns into a snake and threaten him with turning his river into blood. I don't think any of us are going to be doing that. I don't think that's the idol or the battle that we need to face. But looking at Moses' faith, trusting in God, knowing the one, by faith, Moses has no fear of the things of this world because he's met the God who was and who is and always will be. He met the God who is described in Colossians 1 as this. Starting in verse 15, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. What thing in our lives, big or small, could we possibly fear if we stand in the presence and relationship with the God who made us, with the God who is described here? Knowing that that image of God, the perfect image of God, the invisible God made visible, human flesh, God incarnate in meat, in flesh, who is with us, who sent his Spirit to live in us. If that's even kind of true, how could we serve some false idol of this world? How could we serve money, job, status, relationships, stuff, human organizations above the one true and living God? And how much more would it transform us and bring us actual peace, bring us contentment and wholeness if we truly surrendered and gave everything to him? And like I said, these things creep in so subtly, especially in a place like America. There's a purity to a persecuted faith. You don't have the luxury of having distractions. I'm not saying I wish we were all persecuted, but just it looks different. The devil's tactics are sneakier and more subtle. Our hearts turn more easily to things of comfort and laziness, to various desires to fill our time and our boredom. So as we prepare ourselves for communion, we're going to take communion in a minute. So if you have the elements, get them ready. That's the wrong one. I need this one. If you don't have them, by all means, go grab one. What things in your life have you elevated above God? What things are you afraid of? What things might hold you back? Maybe it's fear of not being able to provide. Maybe it's fear of not fitting in. Maybe it's some actual fear of people or afraid of the economy crashing or whatever else might happen. But by faith, we do not fear this world because we know the God who was and who is and who always will be. Lord, would you speak to us now?
Thanks for listening today. We hope this blessed you and that God spoke to you. We'd like to connect with you. You can find us at paxchristian.church and fill out the digital connect card. or find us on social media as PAX Christian Church on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. If this message spoke to you today, would you consider sharing this message with someone? Maybe tell a neighbor or a friend. Maybe leave a review and let others know what this has done for you. May you be inspired and transformed by God's Spirit as you step out into this world to declare that there is peace with God for everybody through our Lord Jesus Christ.